Welcome to Literary Libations with Librarians. And this time we are going to be sharing some banned books title because it is Banned Books Week. Now, if you're not familiar with Banned Books Week, it is celebrated annually. It is, I guess, put on or thought of or mediated by the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom. And the Office for Intellectual Freedom tracks attempts to ban or restrict access to books across the United States and to inform the public about censorship efforts in our libraries and schools. Attempts to remove library materials definitely continued even throughout the pandemic. And last year in 2021, the Office for Intellectual Freedom tracked 729 challenges to library, school, and university materials and services, affecting 1,597 books. This is one of the highest years on record for the number of challenges. The office also noticed a particular focus on demands to remove books that addressed racism and racial justice, or those that shared the stories of Black, Indigenous, or people of color. A list of banned and challenged titles can be found on the ALA website, and they currently share a top 10 list, and then they also share the top 100 list by decade that they have been tracking this. A challenge is an attempt to remove or restrict materials based upon the objections of a person or a group. A ban is the actual removal of those materials from a particular building. So Banned Books Week is so important to libraries. It is a celebration of everybody's freedom to read. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but as we share some of the banned books, if you're interested in getting your hands on any of them, you can request physical versions through our online catalog. That's hardcover, paperbacks, large print. And you can also always reach out to your local branch of the Monroe County Library System and talk to the staff there, and they'll be more than happy to assist you. If you see a title that is available via one of our digital apps, you can go straight to those applications and look for the title. Our two platforms are Libby, which provides downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and also magazines, and also Hoopla, which provides downloadable ebooks, audiobooks, and movies, music, and graphic novels. And the great thing about Hoopla is if you see a lightning bolt next to the title, and almost all the titles have lightning bolts, then you can request that immediately and download it immediately, and there's never a wait for those titles. So I am Jennifer Graneski. I am the Dundee Area Supervisor. And our question to kick us off this week, as one of our participants already noted, is a really hard question. And trust us, librarians can go on and on. So the question this week is, why is Banned Books Week important to you? It's important to me for so many reasons. So I really tried to limit myself to one. But I think it's so important to read books from different perspectives that I'm never going to be able to live. As a white middle-class woman, there are so many different ways to view the world that I'm not going to be able to completely understand, but reading books gives me that ability. Our book club just finished The Vanishing Half by Bennett, and Brit Bennett is a Black female author. And you're getting a Black perspective. There was also a transgender character in there. These are all things that I'm either unfamiliar with or I'm never going to live in somebody else's skin or body or experience. So it gives me that chance to see through their eyes just a tiny bit and to learn to empathize with somebody who is not me. And our world needs more empathy. So Banned Books Week is important for me for learning about different points of view, learning different perspectives, and building empathy. Also with us this week is Kristen Brown, who is a substitute throughout the Monroe County Library System. And why is Banned Book Week important to you, Kristen?
Well, like you said, there's so many reasons, but I would have to say the one that I'll focus on is just that usually the books that are banned are the books that we need to start important conversations. There's lots of important conversations that I've needed to explore for myself and figure out how to talk to other people about, to help my children talk about certain things. And it never fails. I always find a book that helps me introduce those, because some of those topics, like you said, I'm not familiar with, and I want to make sure that I'm doing it in the most respectful and empathetic way as possible. And a lot of times reading books that are from a certain perspective and written by authors who have lived those experiences, those are the ones that help me get in that mindset, try to understand things, but also to share those things with my family and my friends.
Thank you, Kristen. Also with us this week is Joyce Tapekey, who is a processing clerk. And why is Banned Book Week I just want everyone to know that is difficult to say. Banned Books Week important to you, Joyce?
Well, I never really thought about banned books until I was in my 20s. I was working at Walden Books and More in Southgate, and then eventually for about a year I worked at the Frenchtown Mall one. And I remember the first time I was given this list of books to put on a display for banned book weeks, and I was astonished to find The Giving Tree on that list because somebody thought it was sexist. The tree is female, the boy is male, the boy takes from the tree, doesn't get, and I just blew my mind. And it was the dawning realization that some people feel the need to be horrified and upset and outraged by something. And sometimes that reaches just a little too far. When you take a book that really has nothing to do with anything sexist and turn it so that people get upset about it. I think it just, by displaying these banned books, one of which was the Living Bible, and there was a Garfield book on there, and just kind of pointing out to the rest of the world, do you really want to listen to everybody when they give you their opinion on books? Read it yourself. Make your own opinion about it. That's why it's important to me, because I think that before you form an opinion about something, you should read it yourself, just to see. Don't listen to the next guy. Listen, do it yourself.
Excellent. Yes, absolutely. Read the book that you might be hearing in the news, or you might be hearing somebody talk about. Read it for yourself and think about it. Thank you, Joyce. Also with us this week is Jessica Otto, who is our head of collections here at the Monroe County Library System. And why is Banned Books Week important to you, Jessica?
Banned Books Week is important to me because I am a fierce defender of the First Amendment and of the freedom to read, especially as it pertains to the right of libraries to collect materials and make them accessible to the public. The freedom to read is essential to any democracy. And while my hope is that banned and challenged books are read throughout the entire year, I think it is important for us to have this week dedicated to bringing together the entire book community, including librarians, teachers, publishers, authors, and readers, to unite in this shared support of the freedom to seek, collect, and express ideas.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jessica. And just to wrap kind of this discussion up, the theme for Banned Books Week this year in 2022, and I don't know if you'll be able to see it because of how Teams kind of cuts us off when we record, but it is Books Unite Us, Censorship Divides Us. And the artwork that they created, I thought was very well done. So the uniting are these birds flying off into the air, and then the dividing are the birds in cages. And if you see the full artwork, it has several birds all separated in the cages. And I just thought that was a really good image to explain why reading can unite us. Even if we disagree, it can still give you the chance to see something from a different point of view. rather than just saying, no, we can't have that idea at all. So, all right, now we're going to go into our banned books titles that we want to talk about. And I think I will ask Joyce if she will kick us off.
Okay. The first title I want to talk about was written in 1971. It's called The Hiding Place, and it was written by Corrie ten Boom. Corrie and her family lived in the Netherlands, and her father, Casper, was a watchmaker and repaired watches for a living, and they lived in the house above his shop. And Corrie was a middle-aged woman. They used the word spinster back then. She and her sister were not married. They lived with their father. It's pretty evident that they were devout Christians. So in 1940, when the Nazis invaded and took over the Netherlands, they did something rather unexpected for an old man and a couple of middle-aged women. They started hiding the Jews in their home. They created a little room, which is the hiding place. It was in Corrie's bedroom, and they would take the refugees in there, keep them in their home until they could be sent onward. And it's really fascinating. If you are at all interested in World War II and how people lived and what they had to go through, this is a fantastic book. It is her biography in essence, but she talks about when the Jews would come in, and her nephews would actually stage mock raids on the house so that everybody would get used to quickly getting into the room, making sure there was no evidence of other people in the room. He would wake her up in the middle of the night and scream at her, "Where are they hiding?" until she could learn to wake up from a sound sleep and not give anything away. I don't have the number in front of me, but someone said that they possibly helped filter through 800 different people through their home. Unfortunately, one of them ratted them out, and I believe it was 1944 or 45. I'm sorry, I don't have it written down. 1944. She and her family were arrested. The Jews they were hiding did not get caught. They were able to get into the room, into safety, but her sister, and her father were arrested. The father was an old man. He unfortunately passed away a couple weeks afterwards, but she and her sister were sent to Ravensbrück concentration camp. She talks about the camp. They were able to smuggle in a couple of copies of the Gospels, and they would hold Bible studies in their camp, in their barracks. The conditions were harsh. Her sister passed away within a year, just from the conditions of the camp. And she herself was released a couple of weeks later. Found out later it was due to a clerical error. She was supposed to go to the gas chamber. All the women in her age group went to the gas chamber. She was able to get out, make her way back. And then was after the war, she set up a rehabilitation center. At first, it was for concentration camp survivors. And then it was for the people who were jobless because they collaborated with the Nazis. And then it was for anybody in need. She wrote her experience. She began to tour and talk about her experiences. Just a phenomenal woman. It's just an incredible story. Anybody, like I said, anybody who's interested in World War II should be reading this. She lived to be 91 years old. She actually died on her birthday. And this incredible story was removed from a charter school in California, strictly because the author and the publishing house were Christian. And it just boggles the mind that anybody, for that reason alone, they said it doesn't belong in a public school. except I'm pretty sure these same public schools probably have writings about written by Martin Luther King Jr., who was a Baptist minister. So I'm not exactly sure what the difference is. Even if you're not Christian, I think you would find the story to be very, very fascinating. So I highly recommend that for anybody and everybody, especially lovers of history. I could talk about that one for a while, so I'll move on. The next one I want to talk about, I did a little cheating. It wasn't actually banned. It was, however, challenged. It's The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, written by Rebecca Skloot. I think I'm saying her name right. This was published in 2010, and the author, Rebecca, spent a decade researching this book. This book is not only about Henrietta and her family, but it's about Rebecca herself. But if you're not familiar, Henrietta, she died in 1951 of cervical cancer. She was a Black woman. I believe she lived in Virginia. She had 5 children, very small children, and she went in for surgery to work on I believe it was surgery for this cancer. And without her permission and without any compensation, they took samples of her tissue, of both the cancerous tissue and of non-cancerous tissue. Now, up until that point, they tried to grow human tissue in test tubes, and the cells would always die after a while. For the very first time, the cells did not die. They are known as Hela cells because when they labeled them, they used her first 2 letters of her first name and the first 2 letters of her last name, Henrietta Lacks, Hela. And these cells kept growing. This was at Johns Hopkins. And once they realized what they had, the scientists gave them to anybody that wanted them. He didn't ask for any money for them. These cells are worldwide. They are still alive today. They have been in space. It is because these cells that we have the polio vaccine. It is because of these cells that we have gene mapping. These cells have been used in fighting cancer, fighting AIDS, Parkinson's disease, hemophilia, influenza, leukemia. These cells are incredible. And the family never knew about it. They did not know about it until 1975. They have, to this day, not received any compensation for the fact that these cells were taken without her permission, which was perfectly normal in the 1950s, especially for an uneducated Black woman. They felt no need to tell her anything. It is estimated that the revenue from the Hela cells is $35 billion per year. So again, incredible book. I'm not a huge science book, but I found this fascinating because it really gives a very interesting question that if you go in to surgery to have something removed, who does that tissue belong to? Does it belong to the facility? Does it belong to you? What if something wonderful happens because you gave them this tissue? So there's a lot of ethical problems with this. This book was fascinating. The reason the book was targeted, a Tennessee mother wanted it removed from her son's school. Her son goes to a STEM school because in the beginning of the book, when they talk about Henrietta, she knew there was a problem. She knew there was something wrong with her. And she told her family and friends that there's a knot in her womb. So it very briefly describes her doing a self-exam of her cervix. The mother of the boy in Tennessee feels that this is pornographic and therefore it should be removed. And like The Hiding Place, it's like, okay, there's so much wealth of information here. There's so much to be learned. the part she's talking about is literally one paragraph in this book. And it's not pornographic, it's medical. So again, mind boggled why anybody would want to remove such an incredible story just because they're a little sensitive about that one part. I think there's so many things you might become enraged by reading this book, but that's not it. So those are my 2 books that I recommend this week.
Thank you, Joyce. It is always surprising. And I think particularly for public libraries, we provide access to so many things, but we also encourage families and individuals to make your own choices. You know, if a book is not for you, then it's not for you, but that doesn't mean it's not for someone else.
Exactly.
And that's what I think particularly is so frustrating about those who want books removed, is that, okay, so it's not for you, but it's for so many other people. So thank you, Joyce.
You're welcome.
And I am going to ask Kristen if she would share her banned books next.
Okay, so the first one that I'll talk about is Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark by Alvin Schwartz. And the illustrations for this book, the original illustrations, are by Stephen Gamble. And I chose this book basically because this book this is a core memory from my childhood. I have very vivid memories of like silent reading in grade school. Everybody wanted one of these books. There were several of them, different copies, different versions of them. And you would grab this book, you would go sit in the corner, and you would just read these scary stories. And I was very interested when I found out that this was on the banned book list. I had no idea before, but I actually feel like a lot of the books that I've talked, in Literary Libations have been banned books. So I had to kind of go through and like figure out like, oh, okay, well, here's a book I read. I didn't know that that was on banned books. So this one is really interesting to me because there was a huge uproar with these books, and going back and reading them now, some of them I am kind of like, oh, okay, that is a little creepy. There was one in particular, it's called The Babysitter, and it's basically about a house intruder. And I was like, this could happen in real life. As an adult now, it is pretty terrifying. The other ones though, so the premise of this book is it's a collection of scary stories and folk tales that the author has collected. And he's just put them in this book. And the book is kind of broken up into sections. And in partnership with these really just creepy illustrations, it is pretty intense for kids. However, I am a big advocate of know your children, talk to your children, find out what they're interested in, build that relationship with them, because every child is different. I was pretty mature when I was in grade school, so I would read these stories, and yeah, they were scary, but I knew they weren't real. And I don't ever remember my parents getting really upset about me reading these. Who knows if I told them, but they know, like, I had a great relationship with my parents. So like if something had bothered me, I would talk to them about it. They would talk to me. So this book was challenged because of the material that's in it. So obviously there's a picture there with a woman and she's serving soup in someone's head. Like I said, there's some stories about house intruders. There's mysterious deaths. There's ghosts. There's people getting chased while they're driving. So it's a mix of things that could possibly really happen to you and like the fantastical. So I can see why people would be upset about this. Like the big thing was public schools and this being in school libraries. And I can understand that this would be upsetting if you didn't know your child was reading these stories. But again, I encourage everybody to talk, have those conversations, talk about what's going on. And figure out, like, is this something that really bothers your kid? Are you more worried that this is going to turn into something bigger? So these books were basically an introduction to suspense and horror for children. Like it's no different than R.L. Stine. And so the fact that to take these out of the classroom, from my perspective now as a parent and as an adult, like this is a style of writing, not only as like, the scary suspense thing, but this is something that is needed. So I also thought it was super fascinating because there's a documentary about these books and kind of the whirlwind that they caused. They came out in the 90s, and obviously there was a lot going on in the 90s as far as kid safety. There was a lot of stuff going on with controversies between like religions and things going on with that, and beliefs and supernatural things. So I think a lot of people were put off by that, but it was really interesting while watching this documentary because the author loved that these books were on the banned book list. He thought that more kids would read them, more people would read them, it would get out further. He was like, wonderful, like challenge these books all you want. I'm going to let people decide. It's going to happen. And so it was really funny when I started reading this book because I started talking to other people that were my age, and I just would say, hey, do you remember these books? And they would all go, yes, like those books are amazing. You know, like you would read them in school and everybody wanted a copy, but your teacher only had like one or two. So you like take them home with you and you have to bring them back. So it's just really interesting to get that perspective because, and this probably has no correlation, but I am not a horror fan. I don't enjoy scary movies. I will say, Jennifer, that you have inspired me to read like horror graphic novels. So I can read the graphic novels I can do, scary books and movies. I'm not quite on that level. So it's not like, I don't think it had any like big issues on, traumatic issues for me. But again, know your kids, know what they're reading, talk to them. I feel like these books are really fun. They're just weird. Like I read them now and I'm like, this is just a weird story. Like it has this big dramatic buildup, and at the end it's like, and that was that. And then they're like, but then he came back the next day. And you're like, oh, so it's fine.
And what these remind me of are Grimm's fairy tales,
Yeah.
the original Grimm's fairy tales, which are very dark and were intended for children. Because there is something, and again, you need to know your kid. Like my child hates horror, has no interest. I absolutely know that. We avoid scary stuff with him. But it depends on your kid. But there is something about processing scary things that helps you understand the world around you, that, hey, life's not always fair. Sometimes hard things happen, but you can still have courage and bravery. And then going from Grimm's fairy tales, it reminds me of Disney movies. Yeah. Disney movies are really dark. Yeah. Like The Lion King. I mean, that's a really hard thing to process. So I think that the illustrations and scary stories and the story themselves, because they're weird, made it harder for parents. And again, I knew scary stories were not going to be right for my kid. So I don't think he's read them yet, despite my best efforts to be like, come on, no, come on. But so it's just a matter of knowing your kid and knowing what they're reading and what they enjoy and what they are interested in. So
well, it's really interesting that you brought up the Grimm fairy tales, because I actually checked that out. I just went back through and read them because I was like, man, like those were also like kid stories, and they are intense. There is one game about kids playing and they're like pretending to kill a pig because their father is a farmer, and they're actually killing the children. And I'm like, this is intense, which is Scary Stories is not on that level. So like, I don't know if Grimm fairy tales have ever been banned, but those are much more intense than what this is. So yeah, I'm with Joyce on this. Like some of them, you just kind of look through the reasons and you're like, okay, like that. Okay. Okay. So my next book is, I love this book. It's a really, really great book. It's called Jacob's New Dress, and it's by Sarah and Ian Hoffman. The illustrations, I think, go perfect with this book. And the title pretty much explains everything that happens in the book. There's Jacob, and Jacob likes to wear dresses at home. He has fancy dresses that he uses to dress up while he's at home. Well, then he feels so good that he wears dresses at home that he starts thinking, I want to wear dresses at school too, so I can feel that good at school. And his parents are a little hesitant. His mom's like, well, those are kind of like your nice dress ups. You might get them dirty at school. So Jacob makes a dress thing. So he's like, it's not really a dress. Told me I couldn't wear a dress to school, so I'm making this dress kind of thing. So his mom's like, that's fine. Cool. Wear it. Let's go to school. So he goes to school and he runs into some issues. because boys don't wear dresses. And so there's one antagonist in the story, Christopher, and Christopher's usually the one to point out, hey, Jacob's wearing a dress. What's going on with that? So Jacob obviously gets really upset. He talks to his mom and they kind of talk about what they can do. And he really wants to have a dress of his own to wear to school. So his mom and him design and sew a dress together. So they use the sewing machine and he's wearing his dress and he goes to his dad and his dad is even like, hey, that's not something I would wear, but you look wonderful. And so he goes to school with his new dress and he runs into issues with other students, Christopher. And what I like about this though is there's like a group meeting, which you know happens in class. You always have like your morning meeting with the teacher. And what I like is that the teacher tells him, Christopher, who's always like, why is he wearing a dress? And his teacher says, well, I think that Jacob just wants to be comfortable with what he's wearing, just like you do. So, and then she also says there was a time when girls couldn't wear pants. So that was a thing. And so I just feel like that was a really good way to explain things. And the book was challenged, obviously, because I think it was challenged by one school district because they said it was indoctrination for transgender. And the authors came back and they were like, that's not at all what's happening. You know, this is about just being comfortable with who you are. And originally the district had picked this book as part of the curriculum for acceptance and to show anti-bullying and acceptance, which I thought are really great messages, a part of the book as well. So what this book really taught me was, or kind of reminded me, that a lot of times I think parents or people who challenge books on subjects that they don't know how to talk about. They're uncomfortable about it. It's kind of like a shield for them. Like, I don't know how to process my feelings on this. I don't know how to talk to my kid about this. So let's just kind of not do that. Let's not talk about that. I don't want to get into that. And that's understandable. There's a lot of hard conversations, but it's a part of life. So I really encourage this as one of those conversation starters, and just knowing that like people can wear whatever they want. Everybody just wants to feel comfortable. They want to feel good. And so I thought this book did a good job of that.
Thank you, Kristen. And that just, my son never watches this, and that's good. Because when he was in preschool, he loved dress up. Loved it. And one of my favorite pictures of him was we went to Disney and he could pick out whichever stuffy he wanted. And he chose out Princess Minnie. And that was his favorite. And so in preschool, they did pictures and they let them bring in one special toy. And so what special toy do you want to bring in, Tony? And so he brought in Princess Minnie. And so I have an adorable picture of my 3 or 4-year-old son loving his Princess Minnie in the picture. And it just wasn't a big deal. You know, kids are going to be kids, and he was having fun and he loved what he loved. So yay for Jacob's new dress. Thank you, Kristen. And let's have Jessica share her banned books next.
My first title is a classic picture book about sustainability and protecting the environment. The Lorax by Dr. Seuss teaches kids to treat the planet with kindness and to stand up and speak for others. The story opens with a young boy venturing through a dark and barren landscape to the far end of town, to the street of the lifted Lorax, to see a creature called the Onceler, in hopes of hearing the story of how the Lorax was lifted away. The Onceler tells of a time long ago when the grass was still green, the pond was still wet, the clouds were still clean, and the land was filled with truffula trees. The land was inhabited by the swomy swans, brown barbaloots, and hummingfish. They all lived in harmony in this glorious place until one day the Onceler arrived in his wagon. In no time at all, the Onceler chops down a truffula tree and uses its tuft to knit a thneed. His actions summon a small orange creature from the stump of the chopped down truffula tree that declares, "I am the Lorax, I speak for the trees." Will the Lorax convince the Onceler of the importance of the truffula trees, or will the Onceler's greed lead to irreversible change for this land and its inhabitants? First published in 1971, Dr. Seuss's clarion call to industry and consumers alike resonates more profoundly today than ever. The powerful message that Seuss implored both adults and children to heed is now promoted through the Lorax Project, sponsored by Dr. Seuss Enterprises and Penguin Random House. This ongoing, multifaceted initiative is designed to raise awareness of environmental issues and inspire earth-friendly action worldwide by passionate individuals of all ages. In fact, any new copies of the book printed by Penguin Random House are printed on earth-friendly recycled paper. Now, you might be saying, Jess, that all sounds like good stuff. How on earth, no pun intended, is this a banned book? Well, this book was banned in 1989 by a public school in Laytonville, California, because it was believed to portray logging in a poor light and would turn children against the foresting industry. Now, logging is one of the biggest industries in California, and this ban, it resulted from a challenge by a group of parents in that school district. So my understanding is these parents took out a full-page ad in some publication accusing the teachers of brainwashing their children by sharing this book with them. And it wasn't just parents that were upset by this book, but also the logging industry itself. In fact, in 1995, the National Wood Flooring Manufacturers Association sponsored their own their own picture book sarcastic rebuttal to Dr. Seuss's work called Lorax, a parody attempting to show children the need for forestry. That book is no longer in print, but it is available to see online as a PDF if anyone's interested. I think it's really unfortunate that these parents, this school, and the logging industry chose to react so poorly to this, to what is such an important work. I truly don't believe Dr. Seuss was calling for an end or a ban on the logging industry. I think he was just saying, let's find some balance here. Let's just do this sustainably. So obviously, even though not everyone has agreed with the message in this book, in general, it is considered to be a beloved classic designed to introduce children to the important concepts of conservation and environmentalism. It is the perfect book to share with anyone interested in recycling and advocacy, or even just for those who enjoy nature and playing outside. It's also a great book to include in any Earth Day events or activities. After all, as the Lorax tells us, unless someone like you cares a whole awful lot, nothing is going to get better. It's not. So my second title is Women in Love by D.H. Lawrence. It is set in the Midlands in England in the 1910s. It continues the story of the loves and lives of the Brangwen sisters, Gudrun and Ursula. I say continues because these characters were first introduced in Lawrence's 1915 work, The Rainbow. While just teenagers during the events of The Rainbow, the fiercely independent sisters are now adults making their way in the world. Gudrun is an artist, while Ursula is employed as a school teacher. The novel opens with the sisters contemplating the prospect of marriage, While Gudrun seems to consider marriage as the inevitable next step in her life, Ursula is not sure that she ever wants to get married. And Gudrun asks her sister, "You don't think one needs the experience of having been married?" To which Ursula replies, "Do you think it need be an experience?" Despite their varied opinions of matrimony, the sisters find themselves falling in love with two men who live nearby. Gudrun is attracted to Gerald Kreitsch, the heir to a local coal mine, while Ursula craves Rupert Birkin, an intellectual school inspector who also happens to be Gerald's best friend. What starts as a friendship between these four characters quickly develops into romantic relationships. As the novel progresses, one of the couples finds themselves moving toward that experience of marriage while a series of tragedies threatens to tear the other couple apart. Now, Lawrence initially intended for the stories in The Rainbow and in Women in Love to be published in one big book. And when he took it to the publisher, they said, this is great, but it's really big. So let's find it like a middle, like a stopping point, and we're going to publish it and in two different books, and we are going to publish them for you in rapid succession. So Lawrence said, okay, let's do that. So when the first story was published as The Rainbow in 1915, it ended up being taken to trial in Lawrence's native England on an obscenity charge for what was described as Lawrence's frank treatment of sexual desire, which would be considered relatively mild by contemporary standards. The book was subsequently banned in the UK as a result of the trial. And not only was it banned, but the government recalled 1,011 copies of the book and had them all burned. And then The Rainbow remained banned in the UK for 11 years. Now, when all this is happening, the publisher who had published the Women in Love, the second book, in rapid succession, they backed out. They were like, yeah, we don't think so. The book was eventually picked up and published in the US by the publisher Martin Secker in 1921. It ultimately also was banned in the UK for 11 years. Today, 101 years after its first publication, Women in Love is still listed as number 75 on the American Library Association Office for Intellectual Freedom's list of banned books from the Radcliffe Publishing Course Top 100 Novels that have been banned or challenged. And interestingly enough, it wasn't just the book that was banned. So there was a 1969, this fantastic boundary-pushing film version of the book that was directed by Ken Russell, and even the film ended up being banned in some countries, including Turkey. Fortunately, it's a wonderful movie. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend it. And fortunately, the banning in certain countries did not stop the film from going on to win Glenda Jackson a Best Actress Academy Award for her portrayal of Gudrun Brengwin. The film is listed as number 87 on the BFI Top 100 Films of the 20th Century. So while some have viewed this book and The Rainbow as obscene, it is truly a beautiful work that deals with the complexities of love and relationships, both romantic and platonic. I highly recommend this along with The Rainbow to fans of D.H. Lawrence, fans of historical fiction. Both works are an important part of the banned book's history, and they both deserve wide readership.
Thank you, Jessica. That was really fascinating. I did not know that about the court cases and then trying to get all the books back. That feels like a lot of effort to stop people from reading a particular book.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
All right, thank you. And my titles, You know, if I got a chance to throw a horror title in there, I'm going to throw a horror title in there. And the Walking Dead graphic novel series has been challenged before. I did not look up to see what the specific challenge was, because I'm pretty sure I can guess that it's for the violent illustrations. There are graphic depictions of zombies and death throughout the novels. There's also some strong language. When these were created, Robert Kirkman intended them to be for adults. These are not books for children. And they are very much about a zombie apocalypse. Clearly, there have been spin-offs onto television with The Walking Dead, and I can't think of the other one, but there's 2 now. So I read these before the television series started, picked up the first one, and was really, the illustrations are really amazing. Yes, they are graphic and they are horrifying, but they are supposed to be graphic and horrifying because a zombie apocalypse is not going to be filled with kittens and unicorns. It's going to be horrifying. And what Kirkman really seemed to want to do was to say, what would you do if all of your comforts, all of civilization were absolutely stripped away? What do you do then to keep yourself safe and keep your family safe? And our central character is Rick Grimes, who is a small town cop. And in his entire life prior to the zombie apocalypse, he had seen one dead body and he had only ever had to fire his gun once. And now this happens. He's separated from his family. So in the first book, he's trying to track down his family. And just so you know, the graphic novels are different from the television series. So different things happen there. So it's following him and the choices you are forced to make. And then if you read the series over time, you quickly discover that what Kirkman is trying to say is that sometimes our worst enemy isn't the zombies, it's other humans. When we are fighting to survive, we end up fighting against each other for the very small amount of resources that there are. So I just think there's a lot in there that is worthwhile for those who are able to deal with the illustrations and the language and who think that this offers something to think about what's really important in life. How would you react to literally having to fight to survive? How would it change your relationships with your family, relationships with your friends? How would it change how you parent? Because Rick has a son in it, and it definitely changes what he has to do as a parent. How would it change your ethics? And how would it change your sense of hope? So I think there's something worth it there. And that's one of the reasons why I think horror, while it's also an escape, it also has something to say about who we are as humans. So that's the Walking Dead series. My other book, I was really, I knew that it had been on challenged book lists before, but it still kind of blows my mind that it was. And 2, I was really surprised that in 2 years of doing literary libations, none of us have talked about this book before. And it is a children's classic. A Wrinkle in Time by Madeleine L'Engle is the story of Meg Murray. And Meg's father, who is a scientist, has gone missing and has been missing for, I believe, about 18 months. And a lot of people are saying that Meg abandoned her family. Oops, my slides are acting wonky. There we go. Are saying that Meg's father abandoned his family, and Meg firmly believes that's not the case, but she doesn't know where he is. Her younger brother, Charles Wallace, has become friends with a very unusual neighbor. And one dark and stormy night, because that's the best opening line ever, Mrs. Whatsit comes over, she's the neighbor, and Charles Wallace discovers that Mrs. Whatsit, and I'm not going to get their names right, Mrs. Whatsit, Mrs. Who, and Mrs. Witch all have a plan to help the Murrays get and find their father. And not only that, as part of this, they're going to be saving the world. And part of that involves or that wrinkle in time, a bending in time, which is a tesseract. And Madeleine L'Engle was fascinated by science and by faith. And so tesseract she had read about, and this was in 1962, as an actual scientific phenomenon or philosophy or possibility. And so she was curious about how it might actually work. And so the three witches are able to bend time and help the children travel to different places and spaces in time. And in one of the scenes, they show the children what they're up against. And they show them the earth, and this dark shadow is encroaching over the entire world. And they explain to the kids, this is what you're fighting against. We have to stop this. We have to stop it. And then it becomes, well, how do they do that? And Meg is convinced she's not going to be able to do this. She's never been the best at school. She's never fit in. She's got a temper. She's getting in trouble all the time. How are they going to be able to conquer this dark shadow that is starting to control the world? And I don't want to give it away, but man, the book was published in 1962. So I'm just going to say Meg finds a way to conquer this through love. And that is the point of the book, that deep, courageous, powerful love can make a difference. And there is a line in the book. So this is from the book itself. The light spread out, and where it touched the darkness disappeared. The light spread until the patch of the dark thing had vanished, and there was only a gentle shining, and through the shining came the stars, clear and pure. So the power of this book is you get this female young character who's different and unusual and doesn't fit any standard molds. You get her, you get this family that loves each other and is willing to do whatever it takes to bring everyone back together again. And I was like, so as usual, why would anyone object to this? What is going on? So what I read, and it's been, I want to say, because the ALA has records for the last 3 decades of their 100 top books, and it is on every single one of those. So lots of people have challenged this, but the one that I read was that there is one scene in particular towards the end of the book, which depicts Jesus, Gandhi, Einstein, and the Buddha standing together against the forces of evil. And apparently this was offensive to some who felt that L'Engle was equating the 4 figures and that there should be one that should be more important than the others. And so somebody was writing about this challenge and talking about why this would happen. And this person said, I'm not sure if she was trying to equate them, but she was definitely speaking about something that L'Engle called the heresy of love. The heresy of love was L'Engle's belief that some religions incorrectly place exclusions on God's love. By including these 3 figures next to Jesus, what she is saying is, who are you to tell God whom he or she wants to include or exclude from love? And I was just like, oh, I love Madeleine L'Engle, and now I need to go and read more about her because I just thought that was such a powerful statement. I know she's also been challenged because of the way she combined science and faith, and not everybody was real super pleased with her about that. But in particular, that particular scene seems to be one that was upsetting for some people. Again, I don't understand it. I think we can all learn and read and learn, even if you disagree, even if you read that scene and go, that's not how I would see it. I think you can still see the kernel of truth that says love is more important than, you know, the hate that was spreading through the world in the book. So that's A Wrinkle in Time. That's my not great description of it, but it's a fabulous book. And if you have not read it, even as an adult, you really need to go and pick it up and and give it a try. So thank you to all of you for sharing your thoughts about Banned Books Week. Thank you for sharing some of the banned books that you've read. Thank you to those of you who listened. And next time we record, we're going to be sharing about books that we wish had a sequel. So we hope you'll tune in then. And we hope that maybe you'll go out and pick up a banned book to read this week. Thank you. Bye.